And we're live.
We're live. So, as we like to do recently, we've been starting with a question from ChatGPT. Today's question that you can think about, Vanessa, for about 20 minutes from now is, what's the most common lie companies tell themselves about sustainability? So, it's a good provocative.
I like it.
All right, Eric, kick it off, and then we'll dive.
It's got like a kind of a dark side feel to that one. Here we go.
So really excited today to welcome Vanessa Thompson, who's the managing director of the Sustainability Experts, to the show. This is going to be a lively discussion about innovation, sustainability, and ESG, all kinds of stuff. But before we dive into all of that, Vanessa, we'd love to hear what's on your mind.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. I think one of the things that has been on my mind is what brings kind of innovation to a culture. You know, that's been a key question that's part of the Sustainability Experts. It's certainly a part, I think, of a lot of the conversations around leadership today. What is it that actually makes an innovative culture? And I kind of want to spin it back on all three of you in terms of, is there an experience or a job that you worked in where you felt, inherently more creative or innovative, and what made that experience more innovative or creative?
I'm going to jump into this one because I immediately thought of many years ago, around a little bit after I met Elena back at Nabisco, when we were working at Nabisco. My first manager level job, I had no people reporting to me, but I was the manager of what was called savory innovation, so cracker innovation. And I was basically given no people and no budget, and been told, like, come up with cool new ideas, and had to just get really scrappy. And one of the things I used to do is every morning I would brainstorm at least 3 new product ideas. And I would come up with all kinds of different ways of doing that. Like, I'd look on the internet, or I'd look in a book, I don't know, whatever it was, but something different every day. And so I don't know that it was necessarily a innovative culture per se, but I was kind of innovative and scrappy by
I'm like curious, Jeff, did you come up with like those, the Bernie Bott's every flavored beans from Harry Potter, where there was disgusting stuff as well?
No, it was interesting because I started to come up with what I used to call dig sites, where, like, if you could come up with concepts that tested well, one concept that tests well was like good, but 10 concepts that were very similar that tested well was great, because that meant, and you're a finance person, Vanessa, that meant that I had lots of ways of solving the problem instead of one way of solving the problem.
Sure.
So that was, I don't know, Erica or Elena, if you have any.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in. So there's one company where I ended up being more on the innovative side, and it was the company's culture was such that just about every way they could, it was trying to stop me from doing it. And frankly, it probably would have been much better for my career if I just let it go. But I was like, I can't. I have to do this. I have to try this thing. I got to push it. A friend of mine, I probably ended up contributing to him getting pushed out of the company because he kept working on projects that I was pushing, which I still feel about, although I think he's happier now. But anyway, I ended up publishing some work on this, and it actually it was a defining moment in my career. But like, it's interesting that it was a fight all the time, and I remember always feeling like I must not know something that these other people I'm working with know, because they all tell me that my ideas are stupid. And then when it worked, I was like, no, actually, that's not what was. Elena, what's your experience?
So from my end, I think I had a couple of experiences, different experiences, and what unites them is when the company deliberately spends time and thinks, what can we do to be innovative. And I've seen it play out in different ways. On some companies, I remember it was how you structure the groups and how you make certain functions sit together and how you make certain functions spend time together, down to your process, how you make your innovation gates. But all across, if the company thinks about it and makes it a priority, inevitably there is progress in the innovation.
Absolutely. And kind of just, yeah, I'm just building off of, I think, what three of you said, which is, I think that when the company puts their mind to something, certainly, something great comes out of it. And beyond that, kind of what I saw coming out of the research from the book as to what makes a company innovative is it's not just putting your mind to it, but it's actually kind of creating a structure around innovation, which is kind of funny because when you think of it, you don't really think about a structure to creativity or innovation, but that's something that's kind of seen in all of the case studies across my research is that you actually have to build this structure around it. And so kind of building off of what you said, Elena, Disney has a really interesting way of building a structure to innovation. They actually create 3 separate rooms. And kind of going back to something you said, Eric, which is, sometimes I'll walk into the meeting and have a great innovative idea and they'll feel like, well, this is totally out of place. They actually wanted to create a structure around it. So they created 3 meeting rooms in their office, 3 physical meeting rooms. One is for the crazy, wild ideas, completely off the wall ideas, the ones that are really, really outside, disruptive. And then the second room is for culling all of those ideas down to which ones are we going to prioritize. And the third type of meeting room is how do we get this done? So now we've decided on this idea. Now let's get operational and let's decide what we want to do. And the great part about that is that if you have a crazy, wild idea, you book a specific meeting room for that. And everyone who shows up to that particular meeting room knows exactly what they're getting into. And so they're not going to shoot down maybe a potentially great innovative idea that could be a disruptive new product because they're ready to hear that. And so I think something that's really interesting, just to kind of add on to what you were saying, Eric, is there's actually a way to kind of create a structure to embed that innovation into the organization. I don't know if any of you have seen that or have tried to embed kind of a structure around creativity.
Actually, my note I wrote down while we were talking was around this concept, and I'm sure this is everywhere. I've seen it in the pharmaceutical industry, is like, oh, we want to recreate the startup feeling inside our big corporation. And I'm just really curious. I think that this Disney concept that you just brought up is much more, to me, it sounds much more likely to succeed than the whole let's start the startup. I mean, we have that. Right. Is it innovator's dilemma where it's like if you're judging the innovation piece by the same method as the rest of the company, it's essentially doomed to failure. Have you seen that startup within a corporate behemoth? Have you ever seen that work? Does that work?
Well, I don't think it can exactly be a startup because startups have to run incredibly lean. But I do understand what they're saying in terms of they're wanting to create this mentality in which they're going to create new product ideas, they're going to develop IP faster. And that is something that necessarily a large organization can do. But they, of course, like Elena said, they have to create the right expectation surrounding it. So I think it's really important to kind of set those expectations right. I don't know if you've seen any big organizations create kind of an innovative culture, but something that I've seen across the literature is that you have to have a very, very strong mission to make that happen. And what's something that's really unique about every successful startup we've seen? We've seen a small team who's willing to risk everything they have for that new vision for the future. And that's something that you have to recreate in a large company. It's very difficult, but it is possible. But you actually have to come back to that core mission. And there's plenty of examples of this. One of the examples that I put in my book is a company called Interface. They were already a publicly listed company. They were a very large company. And they already were not necessarily in an innovative business. They were in carpet manufacturing. That's not exactly what you think of when you think of innovation or disruption. You think of a very traditional business model of a Georgia-based carpet manufacturing company. And today, they're considered to be one of the most innovative companies in the United States. Now, how did that happen? Now, when we think of innovation, we think of lean tech startups. We don't necessarily think of major corporations. And the way they did that was coming back to that vision that we talked about and that mission, that core purpose. And they actually developed that halfway through creating the company. In the mid-90s, they said, we're actually not just to become environmental, we're going to become restorative, meaning we give back to nature more than we take. Now, they're a carpet manufacturing company. Now, this is not necessarily something you think of with disruption or sustainability. And they created this really interesting culture where Ray Anderson, the founder, said, we're going to commit everything we have to this new mission. And suddenly, all of these engineers had something more to fight for than just their job or a paycheck. They weren't going to leave this company for just a 10% increase in pay to their next competitor. They were going to stay at that company, fight for that company, develop new IP for that company. And today they've developed IP that's now in Gucci and Adidas and all of these major brands. They've developed manufacturing and fabric IP that's used across the industry. And they're able to develop that IP because engineers straight out of, Georgia Tech come and stay there for 40 years, and they're willing to fight for everything they have. So as a long-winded answer to your question, Eric, I think that there is, of course, a way to do it with a large organization, but you have to somehow recreate that strong mission in a larger organization. And the only way to do that is to have a really, really strong purpose that's existential beyond people's individual jobs, but something that they're really willing to fight for.
So this is really resonating with me. I really love this because this story just kind of confirms in my mind that innovation shouldn't be taken out of context, right? Innovation should be tied into what the company is doing and how the company is doing. And if the company has 100,000 employees and they're trying to operate like a startup of 10, it's not going to work. Right. So, for example, is wonderful. And another thing which kind of permeates through this example, and I also have been thinking of, is a permission. There needs to be a permission to innovate and an encouragement to innovate. And if the company is committed and gives this permission, that goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be that acceptance that it's okay to fail, that it's okay to try 1,000 times before you get it right, because this mission is bigger than just the company. And that, I think, like you said, Elena, is something that Ray Anderson did with Interface very, very well. He actually took 2 years to convince the company to go on this route, but then once he did, he was able to bring people along, and they were able to really give their all things. So, for example, one of their suppliers was a very well-known supplier in their industry. And they had to say, okay, we need to completely rethink our entire manufacturing line. We want to use entirely recycled materials in our entire supply chain. This has never been done before. It's not even thought to be possible. And we need to find a supplier who's willing to take that risk with us and potentially fail to develop an entirely new set of IP that's going to create materials that are from recycled materials. And they actually had to leave their existing main supplier and completely switch to a very new kind of smaller supplier that was less well known in the industry. That was a huge risk for them. I mean, they were a large company, but they weren't necessarily in the Fortune 500. That was a very big risk that they had to take to switch from this very established supplier to a small one that didn't necessarily have the reputation. And that is because everyone in the organization said, no, this mission, it's bigger than just our company. So we're willing to take the necessary risks. But those risks actually end up being very necessary. Innovation, disruption, end up being incredibly necessary, or else you'll also get disrupted. So it's kind of a nice way to actually force yourself to innovate as an organization by creating and sticking to that mission, because it forces self-disruption as well.
I think it's so fascinating to hear you talk about this, given that you have a finance background, because I feel like, the sort of stereotypical like finance is where the innovation goes to die, kind of view.
Sure,
and so
yeah.
I'm really interested in, how did you kind of come to this? I mean, was it just through the experiences or whatever, but how did you come to this very different sort of view of like, innovation is valuable? It's very easy to be like, oh, this doesn't, hit the margins, it doesn't hit the hurdles, it doesn't, this,
Yeah.
that, and the other thing. How do you reconcile those two things, and how did you come to have a different view as a finance professional?
Definitely. Well, my side of private equity was venture capital. So that's a very different perspective from established corporations or, kind of corporate finance as well too, which is definitely going to play things on much of the safer side. But venture capital is about taking the right risks and taking them for the right reasons. And my background, I grew up in Silicon Valley. That was kind of part of the culture that I grew up in. I worked in dozens of different startups, from clean tech biofuel startups to an eVTOL company, if you know, it's kind of like electric helicopters. So lots of different technologies I worked in, major organizations to smaller ones, but all kind of with that Silicon Valley mindset. So I think that led me to thinking in this way. But also I think I wanted to see, why was it that the sustainable organizations were able to run leaner? And that's something that I saw as an upcoming pattern. When I was working at the VC, I would see, dozens of pitches a week. And I was seeing, what was their investment like? Did they have other investors? What was their business model? And after seeing all of that, I noticed that the sustainable organizations were able to develop IP quicker. They were better at retaining talent, and excellent talent as well. And they were quicker to market. And it kind of pawned the question upon me, which is, why is it that these sustainable organizations seem to be intrinsically more innovative than the ones that are not? And part of it is what we just talked about. It's having that mission. It's pulling people together. They're willing to risk something that's beyond the paycheck, beyond their individual organization. And that drives them to say, I'm going to risk this. I might fail, but that's the kind of mindset that breeds innovation. When you're saying, I'm willing to risk everything so that I can create this new product that hits a customer pain point, that's the kind of mindset that really kind of creates innovation. I don't know if any of you have seen companies like that are able to run incredibly lean, or even organizations that you've been a part of that have been incredibly innovative in terms of their mindset, or some of the traits that you learned from those companies that were able to become more innovative and stay more lean.
So I want to pick up on a couple of themes, and maybe a little bit tangential to your question just now. You were talking about Silicon Valley. Obviously, the big innovation that people are thinking about right now is AI. And I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on AI and innovation. But one of the things you talked about was sustainability, and AI is notorious at this moment for being sort of the anti-sustainability technology. And of course, it's not that simple, right? AI can also be used to drive sustainability. But I kind of want to, as you were talking, I kind of want to see how do you bring all that together in your mind, where the innovation itself has elements that may be antithetical to the sustainability. Something that may look sustainable may actually be built on a system that is highly unsustainable. I'm curious how you put that all together in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start out with AI and innovation first, and kind of end with AI and sustainability. I think that AI, as of now, a lot of executives are seeing it as a way to increase efficiency or to reduce costs. That's currently how it's being implemented. They're thinking about, okay, I can be able to scale some of my executive decisions better. I'm able to reach my customers faster. I'm potentially able to personalize my product to my individual consumers. But it's definitely a efficiency-based mindset that we're currently seeing with AI. We're on the brink of, I think, seeing value creation-based AI. And what I mean by that is actually creating new products, new IP, and actually creating new streams of revenue from AI. So, for example, language learning is a perfect example of this. AI has been used to be able to have real life conversations with people, to teach them languages. And so any of the language-based business models, they've really used this as a completely new product that's been launched because of AI. So I believe that we're on the brink of seeing a lot more discoveries like this. So I think that there needs to be a huge shift when we're thinking about innovation and AI, to go from kind of an efficiency-based model to a value creation-based model. But then to kind of answer your question about sustainability is really about the core mission and the product of the business. So when we think about the core product and what that is, it's about addressing a customer pain point. So when we're thinking about Interface, for example, they wanted to build a restorative product that reached a pain point for a lot of customers, which is that they had carpeting that wasn't very environmental. There'd be a lot of off-gassing. They would inhale all of those toxins, and their employees would notice that, their customers would notice that. It would delay productivity of the office spaces. There was a lot of disadvantages. So it actually reached a core pain point for their customers to say, hey, we're going to have a completely environmental carpet that smells better, that's easier to deal with, that can be replaced faster. And it actually created a lot of value creation. So that goes kind of to where I think we need to take AI from an efficiency-based model to a value creation-based model. Sustainability is about the overarching mindset for how can we address a pain point for the customer. That's not just the product, but it's all of the external factors as well too. How can we make cleaner air, cleaner water, a cleaner environment as a part of the product? How can that be an essential part of the product? And if we're thinking about AI as value creation, that works hand in hand, because AI is just simply enabling reaching those customer pain points. So it's really about how do we think about what is our core business objective, and we can use AI to address that. So that's kind of how I think that people need to start thinking about AI. And I think one of the things that is preventing us from seeing a lot of high effectiveness with some of our ROI on AI trials is because we're thinking about simply about efficiency, but that's not the full potential of AI. It's also about value creation. So there's incredible AI companies that I work with and consult with, and they normally talk to their clients and they say, what is the business objective first? Let's really identify that, and then we will provide you the AI solutions that help you reach that objective.
Absolutely.
So since we're talking about AI, maybe it's a good time.
So back to the question from the very beginning, which was,
sure,
what's the most common lie companies tell themselves about sustainability?
I think that the most common lie, or I should say the most common quick fix that I see with sustainability is that people think they can buy their way out. What I mean by that is they think they can simply buy solar, they can simply switch over to, greener recycling bins or things like that, something that's already very established, or a technology that's very established, and then they're sustainable. They're done. That's it.
Right.
And that's great. That's wonderful. Do that. I'm not saying don't, but you don't actually get the full benefits that I talked about from doing that. You actually have to think about what is the core mission that can motivate all my employees to get there. So I'll use a quick example, which is with UC Santa Cruz in 2008. 2008 being, of course, a huge financial crisis here in the United States and around the world. And they were at incredibly low morale as an organization and as an institution. They were having people leave, there was layoffs, and people just weren't motivated to work. They weren't motivated to give it their all, shall we say, and innovate and develop, new intellectual property for the campus itself. And this one woman decided that they were going to create a zero waste program. That means basically reducing your amount of trash and increasing compost and recycling. It's a very, very simple initiative. It's not technically savvy. It's a very, very simple organizational initiative. And it worked so much better than any of their employee engagement metrics. So all of their employee engagement that they were investing tons of money into with conferences and training programs and all of these things was unparalleled to simply creating this campus recycling program. It engaged people at work, it gave them something to fight for, it motivated them, and they actually changed some of their titles surrounding this zero waste program. They said, we're a zero waste ambassador. We're not just a campus administrator, we're a zero waste ambassador. It actually gave people a reason to come back to the campus and really give the work their all and dramatically increase their productivity. And so I think that kind of comes back to the lie that we tell ourselves with sustainability, that we can simply buy our way out. It's not necessarily something you purchase. It's not necessarily something that you have to invest in. It's an entire mindset that you have to change if you want to see the full benefits. We see countless studies of, higher revenue with companies that are sustainable. They're more likely to survive recessions. All of these great financial metrics, you're not going to achieve if you simply buy your way out. You have to invest in the culture, the mindset that is sustainability to see all of the benefits of it.
Yeah. So it's interesting. What strikes me again and again in the stories is that sustainability is very much a mission type industry, right? And it attracts certain type of people. And people who want to do sustainability, they are crazy into it, which is why they stay in the companies, and which is why they dedicate, their talents to this industry. And I only wish that this notion would be better understood, because I think many companies would benefit from doing things, even as simple things like you were just describing with the the Santa Cruz campus. I just think that it would be very much a good thing to do to fuel people's passion, because there are a lot of passionate people who would be behaving differently and performing differently if their passion is fueled.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, not necessarily even people who started out being interested in sustainability. I mean, Interface, that entire organization, none of the people there joined that company because they were necessarily initially interested in sustainability. And they all made this dramatic transition, this dramatic 180 to be not only fascinated by it, but developing the latest IP in sustainable manufacturing practices. So it's not even necessarily if you're initially interested in sustainability, it can actually be a driving factor for any organization. And I'll use kind of one last case study to kind of amplify the point that I think you're hitting at, Elena, which is there's this market called the respirator market, and it works for hospitals to help infants breathe if in the case that they get pneumonia, which is a very common thing for newborn infants. And this one doctor, Dr. Chisti, his hospital could not afford these respirators. They normally run from $16,000 to $20,000 or more. They're very expensive, so hospitals in low-income areas cannot afford this. And he worked together with a small team and developed a respirator for only $3, dropping infant mortality rates by 75%. Now, this is a multi-billion-dollar market with plenty of brilliant doctors, but he was the one who created this very disruptive technology to completely disrupt this market. Why did he come up with this and not all of the other brilliant doctors that work in this industry? It's because he had a mission that was existential beyond himself. He wasn't necessarily just working for an R&D lab in one of these major corporations. He had an existential mission that he wanted to save infants' lives. And he had infants dying in his hospital, and he could not take that. So he worked together and pushed everything that he had towards creating this incredibly groundbreaking innovation. Now, I'm not saying that's the only aspect of why he became so innovative, but it's a crucial factor. And it's something that's been recurring in this conversation as well, too. You have to have that driving mission that creates that lean innovator, as you said, Eric, in the beginning, that startup type culture in an organization. You have to have that existential mission. And I call that in my book moon missions. The ones that are existential, the ones that you have to fight for, the ones that it doesn't even matter if you're going to go to a competitor or not. You're going to stay in that job and you're going to fight for it because it's about going to the moon or something existential like that. So the example with Dr. Chisti is very, very interesting. And I think it showcases what you said, Elena, really well, which is that there's all sorts of brilliant doctors in this market, but Dr. Chisti was the one to be able to completely revolutionize it because he was the one who had something to fight for.
So I want to bring up the dark side of the moon, if you will, on this. Which
sure, go for it.
There's some serious. I mean, there's so much promise out there in technology. We could put solar panels on top of every box store or whatever that there is. There's resistance due to regulations. There's inertia because this is just how we do everything. Whatever. This is real, and it's almost it is also existential to flip that term around. It's existential for the people who will lose the companies that will no longer exist. How do you deal with that? And this is also why I think sometimes something that could have been an obvious fix is not done. Not because nobody is innovative, but they feel there's so much resistance and inertia that they just throw up their hands and say, oh, well, we're just going to keep doing it the way we're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that an innovator is a great diplomat. And what I mean by that is there's somebody who's able to bridge between so many different worlds. And we see this with any kind of pushback, whether it's, you're an entrepreneur who wants to take their idea from a simple idea into an enterprise and you have to convince all sorts of different angel investors. You have to convince all sorts of different stakeholders to give you a chance, even though you have no track record, to whether you're a sustainability professional working in a large corporation. Whenever you're trying to innovate and create something new, there's going to inherently be a huge amount of resistance to that change. And so what you really have to channel is this diplomacy. And I learned from one of my great mentors who truly was a great sustainability professional and innovator. She was the chief sustainability officer for Disney. And she had to implement, let's say, something as simple as removing all straws from the parks, because there's plenty of animals that are in the parks, that are part of the parks, and they wanted to remove all of the plastic straws, for example. Something that seems incredibly simple like that is incredibly challenging when you're dealing with a company that is as large as Disney, with so many different powerful parties at play that have a specific way that things work for their business unit to function. And so she said the first initiative was becoming a diplomat, truly understanding what is everybody's incentive, irregardless of my incentive or what I want to do. I need to first understand and listen to everybody's particular interest at the table. Why are they fighting for what they're fighting for? What is it that they're fighting for? What is their budget? What is their incentive? Who are they like as a person? What is interesting to them as a person? What is the business unit's objective? That is what she had to deeply understand. And she had to take a huge step back and just understand that first. Understand the playing field. What are all of their incentives? And then how can I figure out how many incentives can overlap as possible? How can I try to bring as many people's incentives in alignment as possible? And that's when you get the first step to do something small. And once you get that first small project that is a success, you're able to do a slightly bigger project that is a success. And that's how you're able to create that disruption and innovation within your own organization, or whether you're an entrepreneur. This is something I've seen time and time again. You have to become a master diplomat. I don't know if any of you have had that experience where you first had to kind of reroute your strategy and say, okay, what is my customer's point of view, or what is my stakeholders' point of view? Let me understand that first before I sell what I'm trying to sell.
No, absolutely.
I mean, I definitely experienced that in the sense that I sell after I'd already shown the thing I was talking about earlier, that the innovation. After it worked, I had to prove to everybody, because everybody's like, no, this didn't actually work. This is why. And then I had to keep going back and prove it again. So it was kind of a diplomatic mission, not necessarily to sell the idea, but to actually sell the real world to them. Anyway, Jeff, you were about to say something.
No, I was just going to say, it's funny, Vanessa, as you talk about this, there's something I often say when I'm doing coaching work and training work, which is, this idea that all business problems are ultimately human problems. It doesn't matter, whether it's a manufacturing problem or a logistics problem. It's always about the people in the end. And so I really like your point of, you have to figure out, how do I get people on board, which leads me to another thing I'm always talking about, which is everyone is the hero of their story. And as in their story, you have two choices. You can either be a villain or a supporting character. And so if you want them to do what you want them to do, you're going to have to figure out how does that support them achieving what they want to achieve, or doing what they want to do. So I think it's a really great point, is that in the end of the day, you really want to drive change, you must start from, this is the reality of where people are, and now I can move from here. So I definitely resonates with me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'd love to hear as well, Jeff, in terms of what you coach people on as well, too. How do you get people past that step when they're kind of reaching that roadblock and facing that resistance? What is kind of the typical advice that you give them as well?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's very similar to what you were talking about earlier, which is, like if somebody comes to me and they're like, saying, hey, as a coaching client, and they're like, my boss is a micromanager, the very first question I ask them is, why do you think your boss micromanages you? right? Because to your
Yeah.
point, it's like, if I don't first understand why they're micromanaging, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be like, oh, well, they micromanage me because they're mean. And the way I treat a mean person is actually not very productive, because they're not micromanaging because they're mean. They're micromanaging because they're feeling insecure, right? So how do you deal with an insecure person? You help them. How do you deal with a mean person? You roll your eyes, you get annoyed, you fight, whatever it is. And what you end up doing is just sort of prompting the person in a very unproductive way if you misjudge why they're doing what they're doing. And so,
Yeah.
and that's where I always start from. But it's very much what you were saying in your story, and why it resonated with me, is, if you want people to change, you have to understand who they are and why they think the way they think before you can. I keep saying that humans are the original generative pre-trained transformers. So it's like, how, if you want to prompt somebody appropriately and get them to behave the way you want, you have to design a prompt for the way they behave, the way they're going to behave, and get them to behave in a certain way, as opposed to just doing whatever you want and then being like, why did they not just line up and get excited about my idea? Well, because, as Eric said, maybe it's because they think their job's threatened. Who knows what it is?
Yeah.
So
No, absolutely. I completely agree with that. That's something that I feel every person that I coach as well too. That's one of their key challenges, is first just trying to understand the other person's perspective. And that's such a key thing for any kind of change management. Elena, I'm curious to what you have to say on this as well too, but I just wanted to add on to that with one case study as well too. There was this one company that was really, really great at this, really, really great at listening to a stakeholder group that they may have not typically listened to. They're a hotel manufacturer and developer. They come into particular places and develop beautiful hotels. And this is not necessarily a group of businesses that you normally think of as super inclusive or listening to the local community about what they think about the development or anything like that. But they wanted to completely change the game. They wanted to listen to all of their stakeholders. And so they were going to listen to the villagers who were of this local community. And they were going to say, okay, what is it that you want? We want to be here for you. Before we come in with our initiative of what we want to do, we want to first just listen, which is kind of the point you were mentioning, Jeff, as well, is first listening to what is the other person's objective before you come in with your own. And they said two pretty radical things that I think most businesses would completely dismiss. The first one, which is they said they wanted a banana farm. And the second, they said they wanted sailboats, beautiful sailboats that were their traditional sailboats. And their business say, well, that's great, but that's not what we do. So that's not really something we can help you with. But they actually went out of their way and they did it. And they invested in miles and miles and miles of great agricultural land, which ended up creating a very unique farm-to-table experience for all of their hotel guests. And then they also did invest in the boats, which was a very unique sailing experience where they have actually all of the locals teach the visitors how to sail these boats in a very, very unique way that you can only get at that particular hotel. And suddenly, people all over the world were traveling to this specific hotel to have this very unique sailing experience that you can only get there. And so what I think is interesting about this story is sometimes when you first listen to somebody, it may seem completely off from what your agenda is. It might seem completely off task to what you want to do. And you actually have to be the creative, innovative one to say, okay, how does this overlap with my business model or my agenda? Let me first really understand, apart from my agenda, what it is that they're saying and what it is that they want. And then let me think about a creative way where I can overlap my agenda or my business model to what it is they're saying. And that's actually a great way to spark innovation, is actually listening to someone who's completely different from yourself. These villagers are very different than the people who are developing hotels. And they completely, truly listened to them. And that was the spark that created a very unique competitive advantage for this hotel. So I think what's interesting to what you're saying, Jeff, is it's not just helpful for you getting your agenda across, but sometimes it actually makes you much more competitive in the market if you're able to listen when your competitor wasn't listening. If you're able to listen to all of your stakeholders, even if they're not your customer, all of your stakeholders, and create that unique competitive advantage in the market to actually tailor yourself in a very, very unique way. So there's so many different benefits to kind of listening to someone who's very different from yourself and bridging that to what you want to accomplish.
So, Vanessa, this is so fascinating, and we've actually, our 30-minute episode is now stretched almost into 40 minutes. So we're going to switch over to our ending segment where we go around and each person says one thing that they want to leave our audience with. What we don't tell you at the beginning is you as the guest always get to go first. And so that gives you... it gives you the floor, but it also gives you less time to think. But what's one thing that you'd like to leave the audience with?
I think that anyone who's listening to this, if you have a particular mission that you want to accomplish, I want to give you a little faith that every single innovator that I used as a case study in my book, none of them initially knew how they were going to accomplish the first step at first. And so all of these great innovators, the person who's called the most innovative CEO in the United States, even he didn't understand how he was going to take his first step towards his mission. But it's first kind of started with getting a group of people that believed in that mission together and having a bunch of trial and error until they created that first innovation. So I want to give everyone kind of a piece of hope and inspiration that if you have a core mission that's really inspiring to you, you don't necessarily need to know your first step. You just need to kind of get started and create that beautiful community around you that can support you.
Awesome. I love that message. Vanessa, before I give my one thing, how can people reach out to you? What's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sustainability Experts is a podcast. So we have a new innovator to come on each session. We've had the Olympian Venus Williams on. We've had incredible CEOs like Philip Hoare come on. So we take a different take in every episode to talk about practical business advice for how to implement some sustainability and innovative solutions for your specific business or initiative. So if you want to listen to that podcast, it's called The Sustainability Experts. If you want to go to our website and look at consulting or speaking services, it's the-sustainability-experts.com. Or if you want to reach out to me, I'm vanessathompson.com, or you can reach out to me at Vanessa Thompson on LinkedIn. Happy to connect.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm going to actually pick up on something that I was thinking about probably in almost every sort of part of this conversation, which was, and I'm going to butcher this, I think it's an Einstein quote, but this idea that Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the mind that created it. And I think that I just kept that idea just kept coming into my head every time, every sort of segment of what you were talking about and what we were talking about was this idea that, innovation really comes from taking a look at things in a different way and not trying to incrementally, get from where you are to the next thing, but to actually rethink the problem, like your example of the doctor and the respirator and so forth. Like we get so stuck in, oh, we do it this way, so all we can do is sort of tweak the way we are doing it. And I think that the true innovation comes when you do something totally differently. And I wonder if that's part of, the piece of what, the sustainability piece actually brings to it, is like, oh, we're going to put this new constraint here that is going to force us to think differently. So that's my one thing. I'll pass it over to Elena to.
So I would actually build on what you were talking about just recently, Vanessa, with the example of a hotel and listening to all the key stakeholders, likely and unlikely, because it is a competitive advantage. And not only does it fit with the existing business model, but it pushes the business model, it changes the business model, and it propels the business model in the ways that otherwise, just like your examples, that otherwise would have been unattainable. And it is surprising that many organizations actually do not do it. They think that their answer is the right answer, and that notion should be flipped on its head.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in and talk about a point that you made earlier on, Vanessa, which was that your mission needs to have this sort of existential nature to it, and that's what is going to drive the ability to move innovation. And I also want to kind of loop back to that kind of the fight between the, like the Star Wars, Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker fight between two existential concepts of like, how do you if you're fighting against an existential resistance, you're going to have to, like, to your point, I think you have to have an existential mission in order to do that. And I think that, I guess that's kind of matching each other's energy is going to be the only way that you're gonna get past that resistance. Thank you so much. This was a really fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you doing this late on a Tuesday evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.